Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Navigating Your Dental School Interviews. My name is Elizabeth Reitz, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Go Dental Initiative here at ADIA. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. So everyone knows, all attendees are in listen-only mode. We will leave time at the end for Q&As, but we do encourage you to send your questions through the questions box throughout the presentation, and we'll definitely try to answer as much as we can towards the end of the webinar. And one final thing, this webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent the recording after the event later this week. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome our three esteemed panelists. Dr. Amanda Galindo from the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston School of Dentistry, Dr. Jeffrey Turchi from Western University of Health Sciences College of Dental Medicine, and Ms. Jessica Williams from the University of Illinois Chicago College of Dentistry. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's get started. Applicants, you have secured a dental school interview or several. Congratulations. The next step is ensuring you are well prepared. So let's begin by talking about what to do before interview day. Dr. Galindo, what are two things applicants can do prior to interview day to help them make a good impression?
Okay, so welcome everyone. I would say one of the first things you need to do is research the school you're applying to and being interviewed at. Take the same maybe track that you would if you were researching a company that you were applying to. Research their vision, research their mission statement, and make sure you highlight your own attributes that can help meet that institutional mission. So for example, a lot of missions will talk about improving oral health and patient care in order to provide that patient care to our communities. And so make sure you highlight how can you help to meet that mission as an institution, because we're trying to see if you're going to be a good fit for our school, a good fit for our mission and our vision statement. And so definitely you're going to want to go out and research those different items at each individual school. I would also say come with a list of questions. So again, dealing back with research, go into the websites and pull up their curriculum, pull up their clinical practice structure or their clinical curriculum, maybe their student life activities, and come prepared. And it's always impressive to show the committee that you have done some research and have come well prepared to the interview. I would also say we have, let's see, we consider our interviews here at UTSD at Houston more as a visit versus an interrogation. So we already have 17-page plus application that we've really done a holistic review on. And so if you're sitting at our table and you've been invited for an interview, we already know that you are deserving of a spot at our school. What we're trying to do is find out on a more personal level what you can contribute to our institution, what you can bring to our class, how by giving you an offer of admissions, how is that going to play out maybe first year, second year, third year, fourth year, exactly. You know, we want to see what you can contribute and bring to your class. So have some of those action items prepared already when you get invited for that interview. Make sure it comes across. You know, you'll have an essay, and a lot of that will come in your essay, but you can have an opportunity to elaborate more with a committee member face-to-face on the visitation day as to what you can contribute to the class.
Thank you so much. Dr. Turchi, anything to add?
Yeah, a little bit, and this kind of dovetails with what Dr. Galindo was saying. One of the questions you should ask the school before you come for the interview is if it's going to be an open or closed file interview. Some schools have the application in front and may ask questions about parts of your anything to do in the application, whether it's a grade you got in a class or something like that. We do closed file interviews here, and it's very similar to what Dr. Galindo was saying, where we're trying to just find out more about who you are, if you'd be a good fit. Most of the time we have a third or fourth year student participating as well, and they're kind of looking at it to see would I want this person as a classmate, because we feel like admitting students who are going to be very collegial and want to work together is really part of our mission. So if you can find out ahead of time if it's open or closed file, that would really be helpful in terms of how you prepare yourself. Because like Dr. Galindo said, you should be interviewing the school as well. I mean, it's an interview, but it's also recruitment as well. And if you got an interview at our school, you're considered acceptable, and we just want to now find out who you are more as a person. The other thing I would say, and I'm just kind of a little bit of a nut with this kind of stuff, just in terms of where you're coming from. If you're in a hotel, find out what's traffic like in the morning. How long is it going to take you to get to school?
Yes.
And I would rather be an hour early than 5 minutes late. That's just how I am. But just takes away some of the stress if you know how to get there, maybe even do a test run, know where you're going to park, et cetera, to just take all of that out of the equation so you can focus on just showing up and saying, this is who I am, and this is why you should accept me.
Thank you. I think that's a very good reminder for all of us, Dr. Turchi, even if you're not applying to dental school, just in general for appointments, if you could do a test run, you should. So great, thank you. Jessica, did you, I know you've heard from both Dr. Galindo and Dr. Turchi, did you do anything differently? Is there anything, maybe that, from the student perspective that you can touch upon?
No, I didn't do anything differently. Actually, I was nodding in agreement the entire time because those are the things that I did. I made sure that I researched the school really well, because when you're applying to schools and you're looking at all these different schools, like, you have a lot of different information in your head about each school, and you have to really just go on the website or talk to maybe a student that you know there, so you really get an idea. You really need to be in that mindset. You need to be in the mindset of the school that you're going to that day. And so the night before my interviews, I would go on the school's website, look through all the pages. And me personally, like, I'm interested in public health and community dentistry, and so I was like, okay, so let's go to that section and see what they offer, where I could fit in. So I was constantly thinking, okay, what can this school offer me, and what can I contribute to this school? So that's definitely something that I did before my interview. And then also, Dr. Turchi mentioned a very important point. You could be very well prepared, but if you get there late, or if you run into traffic, or you can't find somewhere to park, or you're not too sure about which room it is, like, just leave really early. Get a good night's sleep, get up really early, make sure the night before, even days before, you have an idea of the route that you're going to take, because those little things can make a huge difference. So definitely make sure that you know your travel plans as well, and you plan out for that, because anything can happen. So.
Right, and especially in Southern California, correct, Dr. Turchi?
Yeah, depending on which direction you're going could make all the difference in the world.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jessica. I think it's a good point, and something we can all remember about the good night's sleep. That's one thing that I think students forget about. They're so frantic about the dental school interview and making sure everything is well prepared ahead of time, and maybe, only get 2 hours or 3 hours of sleep. But, that can really affect how you interview. So thank you for bringing that up. That's great. So, okay, interview day has arrived. Dr. Turchi, in your experience, what are 2 things applicants can do on interview day once they've arrived on campus?
Well, one of the things that we see quite often is the interviewees will all kind of be in the same place together. There's always going to be a handful, hopefully a small handful, of interviewees that somehow feel like, if I can make somebody else feel anxious, that's better for me. So you have to take what everybody says in that group kind of with a grain of salt, and realize that not everybody there, the other interviewees, maybe have your best interests at heart. And so if somebody says something that's making you feel more anxious or inferior or something, just walk away and go talk to somebody friendly, because there's a lot of that goes on. We've been trying to get, we just actually had an interview a week ago Saturday, and we had our own students in those areas instead. So instead of talking to each other, they were asking our students questions, which I think was very helpful. The other thing is I think Jessica made a great point about knowing something about the school when you get there, because if you don't know anything about it, the schools don't like that. You should know why you're there and why you applied. I mean, it should have been something you thought about a long time before that, but you need to communicate that you know something about the school. couple other things real quick. I just want to say, it's the easiest thing to say in the world, but it's just so true, is that you just need to be yourself. At the same time, like we have a student who I adore him, and he told me when he interviewed, he said, I just decided I'm going to be myself, and if they don't like me, then I probably don't want to be at that school anyway. Because if you put on some kind of performance and you get accepted, well, now you got to be that person for the next 4 years, and it may make it so it's not a good match. The other thing I would say is just smile and be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm can cover up for a lot of little errors along the way. You see someone's interested and enthusiastic and positive, it goes a long way, I think.
Great, thank you. Very good advice. Jessica, do you have anything to add? You've been through the experience.
Yeah, so when you're there, just make sure that you're keeping note of who you're talking to, because you're going to meet a lot of people that day, and so, you know, the admissions staff is going to talk to you, maybe the dean might come in. If you don't already know who these people are, make sure that you're really taking note of who's talking to you and who you're listening to. And then and even maybe some of the students too, if you want to keep in contact with them, but definitely make sure that you know the faculty, staff, and students that you're talking to. And then also throughout the whole day, because this is again a process where they get to know you better and you get to know the school better, and you know, hopefully you'll get accepted, and then you'll have to decide between the schools that you're going to. And so during my interview day, I was like either writing it down on paper or like mentally recording in my mind my thoughts and feelings about the school and about you know, what I experienced and, you know, what I liked about the school, what I didn't like about the school. I was writing all these things down, or again, like taking a mental note about what I'm experiencing on interview day.
Great, thank you. Great advice. So we know what an applicant does after an interview is just as critical as what they do during the interview. Dr. Galindo, could you tell our audience members 1 or 2 actions they should take after a dental school interview?
Sure. So one of the things we always tell our students who come in and interview, or even just prospective students just to be aware of this, is that even though they got an interview, they still need to keep working hard, just as, you know, working hard each and every day, doing something new, going out and shadowing, keeping up with their leadership, keeping up with their service. It's not just going to stop once they've, you know, come in for an interview. And the main reason for that is, what if you have to be a reapplicant, right? So a lot of times students get relieved, they got an interview, okay, now I can take a break. Maybe their interview was, I don't know, in December, and so now they're thinking they're going to take the spring semester off. But what if they have to reapply, and all of a sudden here in Texas, our Texas application opens May 1st. So if they wait to hear back from us, which can be a very, very long process, I mean, we're still admitting students even in May, sometimes June, and all of a sudden they have to reapply, what significant changes are they going to have in that reapplication? And so if they just sat back after they interviewed, then basically they would be reapplying with the same exact application for the following year. So one thing is just to stay involved, stay connected to the profession, keep gaining that knowledge of the profession, maybe staying academically connected even if you graduate early, like in December, maybe take an additional upper level science course or something like that, but to keep moving, keep working hard each and every day, even after the interview has already occurred.
Great advice, thank you. Dr. Turchi, do you have anything to add?
I agree with all of that. I think it's really important that they continue to do some kind of productive, constructive activities. And we talk a lot about other required courses that are not prereqs, and I always really try to get students to understand that we're not telling them to take those classes to help them get into dental school. It's so that when they get here that they can be successful. Because I say this all the time. I said it last night with a pre-dental group. And it sounds like it's a joke, but it's not. I'm sure Jessica will agree with me with this, is that everybody thinks the hard part is into dental school, but the real hard part is to get out. Right. So once you're there, you're like, okay, I got in, great, and now you're taking all these classes that you might not have even taken in undergrad. And so I think it's really important to keep preparing yourself for success, because dental school is hard. I mean, it's doable, but you want to put yourself in the best possible position for success.
Great
And
advice.
just to add
especially
on,
that's for sure. We have a lot of students that had to apply multiple times, and they're doing great. But in between time, like Dr. Galindo said, they were doing productive activities.
Dr.
to add on to Dr. Turchi's statement is that if you go out to our website, it says the minimum requirements. So we definitely always encourage them to take additional upper-level science courses to better prepare them for the rigor once they get into dental school. So I agree 100%.
Great, thank you. Jessica, do you have anything to add?
Mine was just a little thing. After my interviews, I sent people thank you notes. So I don't know, like I talked with some of my classmates and they said no, like I felt like that was too personal, like, you know, when they obviously got into dental school. But me personally, just the person who I am, I really did want to thank the school for the opportunity for, you know, for inviting me to interview. So I sent thank you notes.
We do get thank you notes, and we do appreciate them as well. So yeah, that's just a nice little gesture, but not everyone does it. Not everyone has to, and it's not anything that will, you know, deter an offer of admissions, but it's just a nice gesture.
And I
agree 100%. I like getting them. They're very nice. The one thing that I would not do is just show up to the school and knock on the admissions person's door and say, hey, what's going on? Am I on the waiting list or what? That's going overboard a little bit, but the thank you note is very nice. Good job, Jessica.
Well, Dr. Turchi, that's an excellent segue. So, you know, we've discussed a lot of the do's, but there are a couple of don'ts that we should avoid, or that potential dental students should avoid, and that are critical to ensuring a good interview experience. So, Dr. Galindo, would you start us off? Can you name a couple of things that applicants should avoid doing during the interview process? And, you know, feel free to touch upon the before, during, or after.
Okay, sure. So I would say just for applicants to remember that they're applying for a DDS program. Initially, they're not applying for a specialty program or a residency program. So sometimes an applicant can come in for an interview and really, you know, that's all they talk about is how much they want to be an orthodontist or a pediatric dentist, or maybe go into some type of hospital residency later. It's okay to mention that, but just make sure that your main focus at that period of time is getting into a DDS program to become a general dentist first. So you have to first become a general dentist before you can go on and specialize. So I don't want to deter you from mentioning these things on your interview, but just don't have that be the main focus. That can go for your shadowing hours as well. And again, every school's different. Every school looks at it differently. But if, let's say, 90% of your shadowing hours are with an orthodontist and only 10% with a general dentist, have you done your research first to become a general dentist enough to really show the committee that this is what you want to do? So not everyone may have the opportunity later on to go into a specialty. It's extremely competitive, as many of you guys would know. But it's great to have those goals and ambitions, but just make sure primarily at the time of your interview, your main goal is to get into your DDS program first to become a general dentist. And then I would say the second thing is exactly what Dr. Turchi already mentioned. The thank you note's great. Those are really nice to read. We do enjoy them. But calling every day or emailing or just showing up to the Office of Student Affairs or maybe even the faculty who interviewed you is not necessarily appropriate or professional. Going back to my first example, when you're applying for a company or a job later on down the road, you wouldn't be calling that employer every single day, did I get the job, did I get the job? So just remember it's not very professional to remain patient. Again, every school's admissions process is different. That's why it's called a process. And so it can be a very, very long process. And so I promise you, we will notify you immediately as soon as your application goes through a status change. That will be an immediate thing. So as soon as we switch your status over either to an offer of admissions or maybe an alternate status or even a rejection status, we're going to notify you immediately.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Turchi, anything to add?
I think during the interview process, something that I see quite often is we'll ask a question, and we try to make our interviews more conversational, but at some point we do ask some pertinent questions. And there are times that I feel like students, like their hard drive is spinning and they're looking for the pre-programmed answer, and they finally get to it and they go, ah, and they start to spit the answer out, and it doesn't quite even answer the question that you asked. So I think the best thing that you could do is to just come in with a clear view of why you want to go to that school, why do you want to become a dentist, and everything else is sometimes you just have to be able to think on your feet. And I think if you can answer questions authentically, and it sounds like that this is something that that wasn't pre-programmed, it lets us know that this is a personable person that can communicate, express their ideas, and even if it's okay once in a while to say, you know, I don't know, I never thought about that before. And I think that that's the kind of thing that makes us realize, hey, this is someone who's eventually going to be able to relate to a patient. So at the end of the day, they've got to be able to make a patient comfortable to leave the waiting room and come all the way into that chair, lay flat back, and open their mouth and let us go after them. So it's a huge leap of faith, and we just see that it takes a certain personality to get that kind of communication. And we think that ability to be able to hold a conversation is very important.
And that's one thing we can't determine off the application, and so the interview day definitely is something that we take, you know, in regards to communication skills. That's our opportunity to really see if you would be able to communicate with a patient, comprehend some of these questions. And so if you're super nervous and not being yourself and just trying, like he said, it's just to go through what you've memorized already, maybe those communication skills won't come across as clearly, and so you do want to be careful with that.
Great, thank you. So Jessica, from your experience and in your opinion, what's the one most important thing applicants should avoid doing or saying during an interview?
Oh, one? Oh gosh.
Name a few.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I have a couple.
Great.
One, don't say that you're nervous. Some people may disagree with me, but I always feel like that when you say that, you set the tone, and I don't think that that's a tone that you want to set and that you want to tell them that they're nervous. I mean, they may be fine with that, like, oh no, don't be nervous, but to me it's just like, just be confident. Also, don't talk about anything that you can't expound a little bit on. So don't bring up, say, like the Affordable Care Act that you don't know like anything else about that. You know, you can't expound on it just like in a few more sentences. And then also, you know, some schools, they seem really relaxed and they make jokes and they try to make you guys feel a bit more at ease, but don't let your guard down too much and say things that you wouldn't say, you know, in a professional setting. So those are just a few of my words of advice.
Perfect. Great. So this is also for you, Jessica. So looking back, besides what you've mentioned today and what we've talked about, could you share with our audience members just a couple of things you wish you had known before your first dental school interview?
We talked about it a little bit before. You're there because they want to get to know you and really bring the personality off of the paper that they've been looking at. It's really an opportunity for you to shine. So instead of looking at it as a process where you're being weeded out, look at it as a process where you stand out, instead of making it seem like it's a chopping block. So, but it can be a very positive experience, definitely. Like most schools try to make you feel very welcome and so.
Thank you. I like that phrase, not weeded out, but stand out. I think that's a good thing to remember. Well, that's great. Thank you. So one thing I want to make sure I do is to kind of summarize what we talked about. You know, part of this is really making sure everyone kind of knows the do's and the don'ts. So just really quickly to summarize and recap what our panelists have so excellently discussed. So some of the things to think about before the interview is to make sure you research the school. Know the vision and know the mission, and you know, hopefully during the interview you'll be able to talk about that. And you also want to make sure you highlight your own attributes. Again, this has come up a few times on the webinar, but you know, this is where you're able to really talk about, you know, have a conversation about your passion for dentistry and why you want to, you know, become a dentist, and that can come across in the personal statement, but this is really your opportunity to do that and highlight why you personally will be a good fit for dental school. So make sure you don't miss that opportunity. Come prepared. Come with a list of questions. Prepared also means traffic. Get a good night's sleep. Make sure if you have the opportunity to do a test run the day before, great. Know where to park. I think that's, something that's really overlooked, but, you don't want to be 5 minutes late. You want to be an hour early if you had to pick the two. Dr. Turchi mentioned asking about an open or closed interview. If you can find that out beforehand, that's great. And make sure that you ask, you're prepared to ask questions about the school. You remember they're recruiting as much as you're interviewing, and so you want to make sure it's a good fit for you, not just a good fit for them. So it's a kind of a two-way street. So during the interview, you might be in a situation where there's other interviewees, in a waiting room. So try not to be intimidated. Maybe take what they say with a grain of salt. That they might try to make you feel anxious about it. You're all kind of in the same pool, so just keep that in mind when you're interacting with some of the interviewees. Again, know something about the school. This has come up a few times, but you want to make sure you look prepared. Be enthusiastic. Be yourself. I think that's probably one of the more important things that might be overlooked when you're going through interviews is, not being yourself means that you're probably more nervous and, you're coming off with a persona that you would have to live up to in dental school, and that's not who you are. So, dental schools want to know you, and this is their opportunity to do that. So make sure you're enthusiastic and you're yourself. I thought this was a really good point by Jessica. Keep note of who you're talking to, students and faculty. Again, if, afterwards, if you do want to send them a thank you note, you'll be able to make it really personalized. So, just ensure you do take note of who you're talking to. And so after, keep working hard. Just because you've had the dental school interview, yes, schools are interested, but, they don't want to see that you haven't been doing anything after that interview. You have a whole nother semester of school. If you do, get in, you still have a whole other semester. And those classes also ensure that you're prepared for dental school. I think some of us do forget that, and I don't know from personal experience, but Jessica can relate, that, the hard part is not getting into dental school. The hard part is getting through dental school, as Dr. Turchi so rightly said. So keep those things in mind. Be productive and constructive with that time. And then again, the last thing, the thank you notes. I think that's a great idea, Jessica. And, again, a handwritten note can, I think admissions officers see a lot of interviewees every year, and so it's nice to hear that they had a good experience and, they really would like to go to their school. So a couple of the don'ts. You're not applying to specialties, you're applying to general dentistry, so make sure that that's reflected both in, your personal statement as well as when you're talking to the interviewers at a dental school, as well as in your shadowing experience. It's great to get a little bit of specialty experience, but you want to make sure you've, done that shadowing with a general dentist. Don't show up unexpectedly, call nonstop, as Dr. Galindo said, as soon as there's a status change in your application, you'll find out. They have plenty of students that they need to be interacting with on a daily basis that are already in dental school, so make sure that you don't become that little pest in their ear. During the interview, come with a clear vision. Don't, come with those questions that are, standard and robotic answers. They want to see your personality, and they want to see that you're able to, express yourself articulately, as well as be able to think on your feet. I mean, that's definitely a trait that's important when you're a dentist, and I think that, or a specialist, and I think that's going to be really valuable in your interview experience. What Jessica mentioned, I think, is valuable about not saying that you're nervous. Of course, I think the interviewers will tell you don't be nervous, but I think that sets the tone for you personally. Might not even be in the interview, but for you personally, that'll get you maybe off on the wrong foot. So be confident. That's what interviewers want to see, is confidence. And again, last thing, and hopefully no one would do this, but, make sure you don't say anything unprofessional. Remember, this is a professional setting. You don't want to pretend that you're, talking to your friends or anything like that. This is very professional, so ensure that you keep that demeanor throughout the whole webinar, the whole interview experience. I think I got most of the do's and don'ts. So finally, panelists, I really appreciate your candor and your guidance here. I think everything that you said is very valuable, and our audience members will really get have some good knowledge coming out of this webinar. So just any last words of wisdom for our audience members? Dr. Galindo, why don't we start with you?
So I would just mention that this is a very exciting time for our prospective students and our applicants, but just to remind them to be patient with our process since each school operates differently. So if they don't hear back from us for a few weeks or sometimes maybe a month or two, it's not that you know, we're not interested or something like that. It's just that we have a very hard job as admission committee members. Just to remind you guys, we're not just trying to build a class, but we're trying to build a profession, right? So we really have to have a lot of time to look into all of your applications and to really do that holistic review. And so just to be patient, not to think negatively if you don't hear back from us for a couple of weeks or even a few months. The other thing is if you've already had an interview at this time, congratulations. Here at UTSD, we have a pool about 1,500 applicants each year, and we interview about 300 students. And so that's about a 1 out of 5 chance of getting an interview. So all I have to say is if you have gotten to that point, to be very proud of yourself. You worked very hard, and congratulations on getting here.
Thank you so much. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm going along with the cliche phrase, be yourself, but in that you need to know yourself. So in addition, again, to researching like the school and how you can fit in there, make sure you be yourself, know what you want out of your education, your dental education, your career, know who you are personally, know what you've done. So even, I know it sounds silly, but even looking over your own application, what did you put on the application? So make sure when you go in there you have a very firm understanding of who you are. And so that can help you with, you know, ad-libbing and having just a fluid conversation with people at the dental school when you're interviewing, is if you have a very firm understanding of who you are.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Turchi.
Well, Jessica made a really good point about going in confident instead of nervous. And it's really easy to tell someone, be confident. But if you don't have any base, then it's kind of a false confidence. But you know, the thing is, as was just mentioned, is a very small percentage of people who apply actually get interviews. And if we interview somebody, because we do close file, that means that everybody we interview is acceptable. And now we're just trying to find a match. So if you have an interview, you should feel like you're already in a very top tier of students that are applying to dental school, and that's the real confidence that you should have. So there's a basis for it. You should remember that. There's tons of people that don't get any interviews at all. So if you have an interview, you really, nowadays, it's tough to get into dental school. And you should take that as your confidence and go into it thinking, wow, I got an interview, now I'll show them who I really am. And a lot of it goes back to picking the right schools that will be a good fit for you, because then it's a lot easier to do the interview because you know that this is a place that you can be successful.
Great. Well, thank you again. You guys have really given us some really great information. I think audience members are walking away with some very valuable information. So at this stage, you know, we've had a ton of questions, as I expect to come in during the presentation. So I'm going to do the best that I can to address as many as we can. We have about 25 minutes, so I'll do the best that I can. So first question, what should I do if there are no dental schools in my state? So I'll throw this question off to Dr. Galindo first.
ADIA does a really good job of getting out all the information for the dental schools, or accredited dental schools in the U.S. And so I would say research those schools and try to find some that, again, are a good fit for you, but also that, you know, there's different types of schools, state-funded institutions, and so really research those schools and see where you would have a competitive chance of being accepted. And we also have something called an ADIA virtual fair, where you can go and virtually visit these schools without having to leave your apartment and pay for travel or your house. And so again, it comes down to research to where you want to see, one, where you're a good fit for those schools, but also where you have a competitive chance of getting accepted.
And I think that's a good question. Will you talk a little bit about, and I know this is an extension of the question, but talk a little bit about what you view as competitive.
So here in Texas, we are state funded, which means that 90% of our incoming class has to be a Texas resident. So that leaves about 10% non-residents of being eligible for acceptance. And so that's what I meant by researching those schools. You know, sometimes there's schools out there that only accept maybe a 1% of non-residents into their class. That's not to deter you from applying, but just to kind of realistically know what your odds are, and if they have a really high application fee, you know, you're not going to want to be applying to all the schools across the U.S. because that can get very expensive. And then the other things that we consider competitive, I mean, I could go on for a whole hour on how to become a competitive applicant. So the main thing is just to have knowledge of the profession. You can have a 4.0 and a 30 on your DAT and not get an interview because you haven't done all these other holistic attributes that we're searching for, such as knowledge of the profession, which includes shadowing, maybe research, maybe service within the profession, and then there's so many more, communication skills, dexterity skills. I mean, we have a whole list as a committee that we're looking through, and I could definitely follow up with you. On our website, we have where those attributes and those essential skills are listed. You can always go out to our website and kind of get a clear idea of what those attributes we're looking for.
Thank you, Dr. Galindo. How about you, Dr. Turchi?
In terms of being competitive, you know, this is something I talk about all the time, and the GPA, science GPA and the DAT are just two of several things we look at that are really not any more heavily weighted. So we're really doing also a holistic review. We're looking for balance. We're looking for people who seem to have the maturity to be able to handle dental school, the academic background, the dental exposure. For us, we do a lot of community-based dentistry. You love it here, Jessica. And so we do look for people that have done a lot of community service as well, because it's a huge part of our curriculum. And if it's something that people are not comfortable doing, then it wouldn't be a good fit. So it does come back to doing your homework on what schools you want to apply to. As a private school, and a newer school too, we are actually actively recruiting people from outside of California. We don't want our whole school to be California residents. And like I said, every school is different. So we're not state funded, and we would love to see someone from every state come to our school at some point and then go back to their own home state and maybe work in a community dentistry setting, kind of addressing the whole underserved population across the entire country. So that's kind of our little, you know, pipe dream. Because of that, we are looking for students from really any part of the country as well.
And I mean, we are aware of those states that don't have dental schools, and so we want to give those individuals opportunities as well. And so we do look at that and say, okay, well, this state doesn't have a dental school. Maybe that's why they're applying to Texas, and even though we're state funded, et cetera. So we will take knowledge of that.
Okay, thank you. This is a good question. I mean, a question that I didn't think to ask you panelists, but you know, how long is a typical interview? It might be a little different at each school. So I'll start with you, Dr. Turchi. What's kind of the average length of an interview, a dental school interview at Western?
At Western, we're typically about 25 to 30 minutes. But I have to say, by the time we're done, I always ask the question, is there anything on your application that you would like to tell us about? Are there any questions you might have? I don't want anyone to ever walk out of the interview feeling like, oh, darn, I didn't get to tell them about something. So I specifically ask them, and by the time we get to that point, they feel like, no, I feel like I've talked about everything I want to talk about. It usually ends up to be about 25 or 30 minutes.
And Dr. Galindo, or what about in Texas?
So you're absolutely right. Every single school is going to be completely different sometimes. Some do panel interviews, some do multiple mini interviews, some do one-on-one interviews. Here in Houston, we do a one-on-one visit with a admissions committee member, which is a full-time faculty member, and it runs for about 45 minutes to an hour long. And then they also have an opportunity to visit with our students over lunch, and so that's another hour. And many of our students are also part of our admissions committee. And so I think that was one of the questions being brought up, is to treat everyone with respect and professionalism. You may be talking to a student thinking they're your friend and kind of getting a little too comfortable, like Jessica was mentioning. And just remember that these students could possibly be part of the admissions committee as well.
Good advice, thank you. And Jessica, if you're willing to talk a little bit about your personal experience at your interviews, just in terms of length.
Mm-hmm. In terms of length, it differed. Some schools had very short interviews, like we were there from like 8 to 11, 8 to 12. Other interviews, I was there from 8 to like about 3. So the days, depending on the school, the day will change. The specific interviews, again, depend on the school. Some interviews, I only interviewed with one person. Other interviews, I interviewed with 2 separate interviews, which were probably like 15 or 20 minutes each person. Panel interviews, sometimes I had panel interviews where it was about 2 or 3 people. So those, one was like about 20 minutes, another one felt more like 15, felt really quick. So it really will differ. And also know, like Dr. Turchi said, if you know if it's open or closed, that I feel like also determines how long the interview is too. Because if they already have seen your application and they know so much about you, I think it might go a little bit shorter, opposed to closed where you feel like that you have to share so much information about about yourself. So it totally differed. Some were very short and some were much longer.
That makes sense. Thank you. A very good question that came in is about questions that the applicant should ask in their interview. I think this is, a valuable piece of information you can share. So Dr. Turchi, would you start us off? Maybe, highlight 1 or 2 questions that you've heard, from interviewees and you thought were really valuable questions that they asked during your interview with them.
I think when they ask questions about the culture of the school, like what are the students like? Are they friendly? Are they super competitive with each other? Do they get along? Because we don't know where that student's coming from. They may want to be in an environment where it's every man for themselves and very competitive, or they may be looking for that comfort zone too. The other question that I feel is kind of interesting, because it really varies from school to school, is what's the interaction like with the faculty? Because we always claim, oh, we've got an open door faculty, although my door's closed right now. But in reality, we really do, and so when they ask that question, we say, yeah, as faculty, we're always available for students, and it's just the way we're doing things here. It's not better or worse, but they need to know if they have that kind of access. I think that's a good question to ask. I mean, where I went to school, I felt like we had access to all the faculty all the time, and so it was important to me. So when I realized they're asking that question, I see that they're really starting to think of what their experience is going to be like when they're here.
Great, thank you. Dr. Galindo, anything to add?
I would 100% agree with Dr. Turchi on the culture question, because that really is something that can really shine once they come on their visit. And so I would definitely want to ask, what's the culture like here? What are the student life here? Because that's where you really want to know if you're going to be that good fit for the school. Because there are some schools out there that are, they're trying to be #1, top of their class, very competitive, and then there are schools that they come together as a cohort. They try to get through this process as a group, as a class. They help each other, and so here in Houston, that's what we really try to present. But I would say individually, that would be an important question to ask all the different schools.
And Jessica, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Maybe you're willing to share with our audience members 1 or 2 things that you asked that you thought made a difference in learning about the different schools.
Yeah, a lot of the questions that I ended up asking were usually about the interviewer. So, you do most of the talking and everything, and maybe your interviewer will share a few things about themselves, so I would expound on that and how it relates to the school. What made you want to teach here? Or what made you want to work here? What do you like about your job right now and how do you notice changes within the students? So I like to get a better sense of the interviewer, because obviously I feel like that person was chosen as an interviewer for a reason. So obviously they want to help recruit students to the school. So to me, a lot of the questions that I asked were actually about the interviewer and why they chose to work at that school. So
Great, thank you.
I mean, can I just say something else? If you guys really want to dig deep, that's where I mentioned go out there and research the strategic plan and the curriculum. Here we have a new strategic plan every 5 years, and so they could go in there and see what that plan was and come and ask questions. Okay, did you meet everything on these plans? What's your vision? What's your moonshots for the next 5 years? Also, another example is we just have a new, we just moved into a new gross anatomy curriculum. And so that would be a great question to ask is why? Why did you move into that gross anatomy curriculum? How is this going to impact your board scores or your pass rates, things like that? So again, if you really want to dig deep, you can get into some of those detailed questions as well on your interview.
That's great. Thank you. Great advice. So another question is, I think this is, a good question. How can someone best talk about their academic faults during an interview? Dr. Turchi, you want to tackle that one first?
About a student's faults, you said?
Academic.
Oh,
Yes.
academic.
Academic fault.
Well, with us, we wouldn't know about it because it is closed file. But, I think one of the other things we really look for, too, because this is, as asked Jessica, it happens every day. The ups and the downs, success and the failure, how do you recover from it, is we might ask them a question about, have you ever had, a time in your life when you made a bad decision or you stumbled, and how did you recover from that? Because that's what it's all about. It's not about the falling, it's about the coming over it. And many times that ends up going to an academic story. So I think, again, if they got an interview, they must have done something right in the overall picture. So to talk about a time that they did poorly or they failed at something is no problem, as long as they say, well, what did you do after that? How did you recover and not let that get you down? Because that's dental school, is you show up, they knock you down, you get back up, and you just keep going. So those kind of stories to me are very valuable in terms of finding out about who this person is from kind of a mental toughness standpoint.
Great, thank you. Dr. Galindo, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, that stands true whether it's an academic fault or maybe a criminal fault. Maybe they had one misdemeanor on their application or something like that. For them just not to get defensive, whoever brings it up, regardless if it's the applicant or the committee member, we're basically just wanting to know, what did you learn from that? We want to make sure it's not going to continue, there's not any patterns. So really just to talk, everyone has their ups and downs, just like he said, and so how did you overcome that, and how are you going to move forward from that?
Great.
And like he said, if you're sitting there, obviously the committee has already done their research and noticed that it's not a pattern, that it's not something that's going to keep continuing over time based on your academic record, and so we've already evaluated it at that point. So how are you going to bring it up at the interview is your decision.
Right. Great. Thank you. I have a question about, any advice for older applicants that are changing careers, and, this maybe specifically about the interview process. Are there, questions they should be asking? Are there things that they should be specifically mentioning because they are career changers? Dr. Galindo, any thoughts?
So we have a lot of non-traditional applicants, and we have a lot of non-traditional students getting accepted who've gone through career changes. I mean, this year alone we had a pharmacist with a career change, a physician with a career change, teachers, engineers, and so it's not uncommon. It's not anything to be concerned about. It's not anything that you need to be addressing at the interview. But on a personal level, as an applicant or a prospective student, you may be wanting to ask those questions. Is there anything to support the non-traditional student? It's a big difference when you're coming straight out of college, you're maybe 21, 22, versus someone who has a family they have to support and have children and have to find a daycare and things like that. So those are definitely questions you're going to want to bring up, is if there's any supportive resources for those non-traditional students at the schools you're applying to.
Great, thank you. Dr. Turchi, do you have anything to add?
Well, it's really the same for any student we're interviewing, but especially for career changers, I think it's really important to see, what was the motivation and what got you interested in dentistry, and how did you get to this point now? Because we also have a lot of non-traditional applicants and students, And I mean, I feel like a lot of times the non-traditional students are the ones that come in and they are the most focused and driven because they realize that this is it. If they're going to change professions, this is going to be the one opportunity. Again, that maturity level, which seems to be just as important as their GPA, and just attacking dental school with the right mentality is super important. But I think it's always interesting to hear, like, well, how did you get to dentistry? Because it's not easy when you're a career changer, obviously. And so there's some of the greatest stories that you can hear about why they're there at that point. Some 21-year-olds, maybe they're because dad's a dentist or mom's a dentist, or someone said, hey, you should go to dental school. But even then, we want to hear what their story is as well. So I think to hear that path to dentistry is very, very interesting. You find out a lot about the applicant.
And no matter what, they still have to have that knowledge of the profession. So they will still need to have shadowing hours and just to make sure that they have done their research as to why they want to go on this path. That's extremely important to the committee. So regardless of what path you're taking, you still need to have that knowledge of the profession.
Great, thank you. And a question about, dress attire, and I think most people make the assumption, but maybe you can just clarify for us. Is it business, business casual? Obviously being professional, presenting yourself as professional is, key to ensuring that you have a good interview and make a good impression. But, is it generally business? Is that what, the interviewers are expecting, a suit? And just make sure we make that clear. So Dr. Galindo?
I mean, here in Houston, it's business, but we don't tell them a certain dress code or a certain attire, but they all come professionally dressed, business attire, suit and tie. I've never really, had an issue where someone has come unprofessionally, although I'm sure it has happened. But we've just been fortunate here that everyone understands it is business attire.
Good. Dr. Turchi?
Yeah, I would agree. We really haven't had any issues, so I would say business/professional, for sure. No tuxedos.
Yeah, no tuxedos.
Okay. Well, that would help somebody stand out potentially, I guess.
And for girls, be careful about wearing heels because you will do a tour most likely. And if you're wearing like 3 or 4-inch heels, it's not going to be comfortable at all. Wear flats.
Good advice. So a question came in, what should you take to an interview? And that's really all the question says. So I wonder, we talked about, having an open mind and, making sure you're confident. Is there any other things, do you take anything physically? I think maybe the person might be referring to a resume or something like that. Is that encouraged in an interview or is that actually discouraged? Those types of things. Dr. Turchi, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think we would prefer not to have some kind of resume because we're purposely trying to just get to know them, and it's the closed file thing. Sometimes people will bring a notepad to write down answers to questions they have or to remember what questions they wanted to ask, and I think that's perfectly fine. Other than that, I mean, really, we're just trying to get to know them, so they really don't need to bring anything. I would make sure your cell phones are tucked away, turned off, put away, nowhere in sight. Because we want to make sure that everybody feels like they're focused on this and nothing else. I know that's tough nowadays for all of us, me too. But I think that's it, just to bring the minimum for us. You wouldn't need much.
Okay. Dr. Galindo, any thoughts?
Yeah. I agree. We don't need a resume or CV or anything like that. The only thing really in consideration is our application through the applicant portal. So that's really what we have to use as a committee to make a decision, plus the interview. But I have seen where students bring in a portfolio, maybe if they want to show their dexterity skills and they're an artist or, have some sculpting pieces, they'll bring in pictures of those images or, just little things like that that they can't really express on their application. We don't encourage that. It's just something some of these students have done, and it really just depends on the person interviewing you if that's going to have a conversation piece or if they're going to move forward from that portfolio since it's not part of the application. So again, the minimum, it's all we really need, but I have seen students where they bring in portfolio.
Right. Thank you. And did you have anything to add, Jessica?
I was just thinking in terms of, I guess, what you would bring with you just for the interview day, and I would just say like maybe a binder or folder, because sometimes you'll get a lot of papers and materials and you want to keep it organized. But less is better, you know. Because you may be traveling to different places, you may have a little bit more bags or something. Maybe you can't stop by the hotel before you leave, so that stuff happens. But try less is more.
That's fair. Thank you. We had a question about, they're not sure how to present themselves in a way that doesn't sound arrogant. And I can appreciate that. Does Dr. Galindo or Turchi, do you have any thoughts on that? How do you really make your best impression but don't sound arrogant? Dr. Turchi, we'll start with you.
Well, I that's part of the maturity that we're looking for, is to be able to communicate things that they've accomplished, but doing it in a not braggish type way. And there's a fine line, obviously, but I feel like there's a way to do it that doesn't sound arrogant. And I think if it's really hard for the person to figure out where that fine line is, there might be a little bit of a maturity issue, because it's like all the people here on this panel have obviously had some accomplishments, but at the same time, I don't think anybody's out here saying, "Oh, look at me," either. So it's, again, I just think it's part of the test of their personality to say, "Let us know who you are, but don't sound like you're bragging." And one other thing too, I feel like there's a lot of interviewees that get nervous and they talk really loud. So that really takes away from anything that you're even hearing, because you're so disturbed by the volume of their voice because they're nervous. And then sometimes you can't even hear what they're letting you know, their accomplishments. So yeah, there's a fine line, but you should not be ashamed to talk about what you've accomplished.
I agree with Dr. Turchi. It's really awkward to talk about yourself and to talk about your accomplishments, but there's definitely a way not to sound arrogant. I would say something we haven't talked about at all during this panel is mock interviews. So practice with maybe your advisor or faculty mentor, even some acquaintances, some friends, and just to kind of make sure if that's one of your problems, then that's something you may have to work towards.
Great. Thank you for bringing up the mock interviews. That's important. Jessica, any thoughts on that, since you've been through the experience and obviously we're successful?
Yeah, no, that's a great point with the mock interviews. I did a lot of mock interviews and practice interviews and interviewed myself in the mirror, so it definitely helps. But also, it does come, a lot of it does seem to come down to personality, and also if you're enthusiastic and you say it, sweetly, and it's little things like that, like those soft skills that can help it not come across as like, oh, look at me, look at what I've done. Just be like, I had great opportunities, I did well, I excelled. So just make it sound like it was a great opportunity for you and that you're really proud of yourself and you really think that you can contribute something to the school. Maybe those are some things that can help.
Thanks, Jessica. And I really do think the mock interviews is really going to be the most valuable way for you to get an idea of where your strengths and weaknesses are, and having somebody be able to that can be honest with you about what needs improvement will be more than valuable. Well, we are actually at the 1 o'clock mark, so thank you so much, panelists. You were wonderful. I think the information that audience members are taking away is super valuable. I know we didn't get to all the questions, so if there's a question that didn't get answered, feel free to email us, and it comes to me at godental, GODENTAL, at adea.org, and we'll try to get your question answered. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you to my panelists once again for being available and answering everyone's questions, and I look forward to seeing everyone next time. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.